I'm so honoured and delighted to welcome Bernard here. This book, Grace Notes, I read it in 1997, and rereading it now after I've had two children, I realise how prescient and amazing so much of it was, that my experience has met and matched that of Catherine Ann McKenna in this book, so lovingly and accurately detailed. The painter Vermeer is name-checked a few times in the book, and I can't think he has a poster there. He has a poster. Vermeer personally has brought a poster of one of his fine paintings there on the wall. But not only, that's not the only cultural reference. Catherine McKenna, the protagonist of the book, is an artist and composer and lives in our ears. And this is a wonderful insight into another way of thinking and another way of being. It's also a really, I want to use the word modest properly. There's no huge idea of the artist as other. It is just something in the grain of her experience and of her life. It is her own personal necessity and her own personal kind of skill. And so I think this is an eminently approachable as well as a beautiful book. So I'm going to kick off by asking Bernard to just read us a few minutes. I'll ask him a few questions, then we'll throw it open to the floor and see what happens. So Bernard's going to read from the opening section of the novel.
Can I just say that, well, I mean, what you've said, that the ordinariness of her life, in some way, when I began the novel, and I wanted to hold that back, and I think it's about 16, 17 pages before music is even mentioned. And it's at a funeral, and somebody in yellow gloves says, "Still playing the piano."
Yeah, but there's all kinds of sound. The soundscape before that first 40 pages is amazing. I think there's I couldn't find it again, the tishing noise of somebody's earphones on the bus, or so, and all these small little patters and rhythms and patterns of sound that are very hushed, quiet, a lot of them, that you're very carefully put in the first from the get-go. Yeah.
In the bus station, somebody's whistling somewhere, delivering papers, or and then that leads on to the thought about Our Lady and the school that she was at, and Our Lady didn't whistle, and these kind of restrictions.
And on page 1, women seldom whistle. And so that the gendered nature. There's just one little quote I want to just throw in. The sound of her mother's hand husking around in the tea caddy. I mean, we can all see the yellow tin of that tea caddy. It's amazing telling choice of detail.
Catherine has just come home for the funeral of her father, and she's remembering some of the things that happened with him. The bus stopped at a crossroads in the outskirts of her hometown, and a woman got off. Before she walked away, the driver and she had a conversation, shouted over the engine noise. This was the crossroads where the Orange men held their drumming matches. It was part of her childhood to look up from the kitchen table on still Saturday evenings and hear the rumble of the drums. Her mother would roll her eyes. They're at it again. It was a scary sound, like thunder, like the town was under a canopy of dark noise. One summer's evening, she'd been out a walk with her father, and they'd come across a drumming match as it was setting up. "Oi, oi, Catherine, would you look at this nonsense?" He held her hand tighter. Land Rovers and vans had been drawn up onto the grass verges. A party of men was gathering. A couple of drums were being taken from the back of a Land Rover. The drums were 2 to 3 feet deep, as well as huge in circumference. They were so big it took 2 men to help each drummer struggle into his harness. They hung the drum around his neck and each drummer leaned back as far as he could and supported the drum against his stomach. Then they handed him 2 long rods. There was a thin drummer and a fat one. Both were hatless and in shirt sleeves. The fat one had a tanned face which stopped at his hat line. Above that, his skin was white. He rattled the rods against the skin of the drum, testing it. The drum was so big in relation to the man that Catherine thought of a penny farthing. "They're made of goat skin," said her father. "King Billy goat skin. You could smell the stink of it from Oma." When she'd heard the drums in her home, their rhythm had been fudged by distance, and the sound had become an indistinct rumble. Now here, close up, it was a different thing altogether. Her father leaned over to her ear as if to shout something above the noise of the drumming, but instead shook his head. When the drums ceased, he whispered to her, "They're supposed to be able to play different rhythms, different tunes, Lily Bolero and what have you. But it all sounds the same to me, a bloody dundering. On the 12th, they thumped them so hard and so long they bleed their wrists against the rim. Sheer bloody bigotry." Catherine stared at the flailing sticks, felt her eardrums pummeled. "They practice out here above the town to let the Catholics know they're in charge. This is their way of saying the prods rule the roost." But Catherine was thrilled by the sound, could distinguish the left hand's rhythm from the right. She tried to keep time with her toes inside her shoes. There were slaps and dunts and the offbeats, complex rhythms she couldn't begin to write down. Even now, never mind then. The 2 sticks working independently, the hands tripping each other up, a ripple bouncing back and interfering with the other ripples which had first started it. The drums were battered so loud she felt the vibrations in her body, was sure the sky and the air about her were pounding to the beat. It didn't exactly make her want to dance, more to sway, but there was an edge as well, of fear, of tribal war drumming. The gathering of men turned to stare across the road. "Come on," said her father. "You're looking at a crowd whose highest ambition this year and every year is to march down streets where they're not wanted. Nothing to do with the betterment of mankind or the raising of the human spirit." Her father's hand tightened on hers so that it began to hurt. "It's their right, their heritage. God love a duck. Bowler-hatted dunderheads, gather-ups, the orange disorder, I call them. And the politicians that lead them are 10 times worse, for they should know better. The whole problem, Catherine, is racist. I've heard Protestants saying that one side is as bad as the other. It's just not true. It's the Protestant side that's bigoted. The Catholics are only reacting to being hated. And if it's a polite kind of hatred too. Around the 12th, the prods will say, "Hello." Any other time of the year, they'll say, "Hello, Brendan." And it's not just the gutter snipes. If anything, the bloody lawyers and doctors and businessmen are worse, men who have been educated.
That father's statement is one of the few times that politics becomes overt in the book. Just two things to run by. There's an ancestor, is it a grandmother's husband, who is deafened by a shot hitting the wall behind him. Was that her grandfather or
grandfather?
Her grandfather was. And the other thing was when she herself uses the drums in the piece at the end of the book, she says that there was a melody that has been lost and all that is left is the noise of the drums.
Yes.
I just thought it was amazing how you used sound in very unexpected ways to that it's in the fabric, or the troubles and the sounds are in the fabric of the book, and in the fabric of, I mean, they're in her problem of composition. I'm not saying this very well, but you know what I mean. This is a very interesting angle. It's a very interesting way into it, into politics.
But I mean, there are things like just come from fact, like the fife and drum. it was like a kind of a double act, and eventually the fife fell away, and you're left with the drum. And the very linguistics of it, that it's a drumming match, in the same way as like it's a boxing match, that it's one coming to dominate the other, so that all music is almost forgotten in some way, and it's like a competition. And then Catherine comes down and hears this as purely a sound.
And is that the redeeming thing then? That she can take just the sound of it and do something with it?
Yes, yes. And I mean, I suppose these things kind of grow out of fact, and it's strange how a novel grows in you. That at one point in Glasgow, where I live, I went along to a concert one night, and there must have been some kind of pressure in the concert to use traditional instruments, and there was an accordion concerto, the full orchestra plus an accordion at the front. There was also a thing which involved a piper in full Highland regalia coming marching down the middle aisle with the orchestra playing. There was Epiclesis, I think it was called, James Macmillan's trumpet concerto. And I sat there at the concert and I said, wouldn't it be wonderful to have a Lambeg drum concerto? And I kind of amused myself to think of it. But then the idea became a real kind of idea.
I mean, you're taking this bullying noise and turning it into something beautiful. I mean, as a Northern Irish writer, there must have been choices you made along the way of what do you do with the trauma and the very alive, I mean, very present, very current trauma of the Troubles. Did you think it through that way, or did you just do that naturally?
It was the sound that seemed to fit into it. I remember going to a play, The Bonfire, I think it was called, and the end of that play, which was put on in the Opera House in Belfast, and there was a bonfire, and there were something like 13 Lambeg drums came on stage and started to play. And it was absolutely amazing. It was like the whole building was going to fall down. And it was left in my head, and then later, sort of, I don't know how many, 50 years later, you start writing, and this is a memory, and it's important, and because it's a divided community, this fits in.
Yeah, I get the feeling that people who take things like that head on and deal with it the way the news deals with it are making works that fade away somehow. But if you get in at an angle like that and find some element that you can abstract or make beautiful or redeem, then the book rises above it somehow. So it contains the Troubles without being about the Troubles. It turns into something about something else.
At the end, when the actual concert or music that she was written is described, I mean, it's in two movements, and the first movement is of horror and the awfulness of the things that have happened in the north, the murders and all the rest of it. But then suddenly in the second movement, this begins to become an ethereal thing, a beautiful thing, and I don't know whether the reader goes with that, but I think that they should, because I'm telling them to.
But she's getting away. I mean, she hasn't been back for 5 years. I wonder, I'm going to throw it open to the floor, maybe we can talk about the family.
Okay.
And the kind of cultural reality and the cultural, what the culture of the family in the book. I personally loved, more than anything, when she comes home for her father's funeral and her mother says she should polish her shoes as opposed to how are you feeling. She says, would you like to polish your shoes? And she says, where's the polish? And does she say, do I have to tell you? Or where do you think it is? Or, I mean, the polish is in the place where the polish is. And it just seems to be kind of amazingly withholding scene with the mother. Does anyone have any questions about the family situation or Catherine's return home for the funeral, or observations about what it was like going into that house with her? Yes?
I can certainly see from...
Can you wait for the microphone just to...
You can certainly see why someone such as herself, coming from that relationship, how she grew to go away and how she grew with symphonies and how she was a self-critic, what kind of a family life that she came from by her mother. That whole relationship is, she's very staunch and she takes over and obviously affects her in such a way that music and I think a part of her unravels at many points, and then towards the end you probably, I'm not sure if you meant to, but obviously she comes back together as one piece and it's a kind of a symphony, but I think she has trouble finding herself and coming to grips with her daughter and her depression and all that's happening with her mother and her relationship, and you can certainly see why she became an artist. You know, and it drives the book, and of course the troubles are in the background, but I think that she succeeds. I like to think that I hope that I got that she succeeds in the end, and I think the first moment that I feel that way is probably at the beach. There's a moment there of clarity. So, do
you think you have to come from a harsh family to become an artist, Bernard?
No, I grew up in a very loving kind of family, but fate kind of did strange things. That my father died when I was 12, and now that's a terrible thing to try and get over. But it was a kind of loving environment in Belfast that my father, after the war, invited my great aunt and grandmother and grandfather to live with us. That's 3 kind of 80-year-olds or 75-year-olds, and was that seconds out round the first? But that was lovely for me, that you got a whole range of age and a whole different set of opinions and different loves and that came into your life, and so why should I become a writer? I don't know. Well,
but these people are very tough on Catherine. Her parents are
Oh.
both really tough on her,
Yes.
and that rings kind of true. You don't bother giving huge explanations.
Uh-huh.
They came from stony soil, basically. Is that what made them so tough? Was it a sectarian thing? Was it a money thing? Was it religion?
Religion. I think it was religion, and that here, and the horror of kind of 1950s sex, or if somebody has had a child, ipso facto they have had sex, and the mother, when she comes home for this funeral of her father, she's not sure whether she's going to tell or whether she's hoping to get away with it, or she's been away for 5 years, and there are a number of occasions on which she could possibly say this to her mother, but she's frightened of how it will be received because she knows exactly what her mother will say.
It is sort of amazing. I tried to explain to my teenage daughter what it was like, and she goes, but why did people do... Why did they do what the priests told them to? Why? And I ended up saying, because if they don't, they will burn in hell.
Yes.
But that didn't even suffice, really. Did people find that the family situation rang true in some way, or reminded you of bad times?
It rang through to, I'd say, a certain age group. I don't know how I don't know how the novel would relate to younger people now. I don't think my children, well, they're not children, but my adult children would be able to begin to understand.
But I don't
Maybe
think
they
that
just
I don't think
accept
that
it.
would worry me. I mean, it's not to compare myself to different writers or anything, you know. But I mean, we read books from the past, and we fully understand the kind of manners and mores and restrictions that happened in Jane Austen's time or Tolstoy's time, or so that you read this book and it's happening. At the time that's set there, of the 60s and the 50s. I mean, my mother told of a member of the family who became pregnant and was put in with nuns until the pregnancy finished and the baby was born. And she said that she handed it over, the baby, she handed it over in a sweet shop. To the parents. And the end of that story is actually rather good, because for 50 years this member of the family sought and looked for and hoped that the child would contact her, and it happened about 6 months ago, which was great. And they are now in contact, and my mother handing it over in a sweet shop has now fallen away, and we can tell happy stories about it.
Just about.
Oh, yeah.
Just about.
Yes,
yeah. But it is only yesterday or 6 months ago. I mean, the stories are still alive. The lady there.
Hello there. I was just wondering, because Catherine's parents are very staunchly religious, and yet she's an only child. So I was just wondering what the import of her being an only child is.
It's simpler to write. Yes. Well, it's what comes out of your own life in a way, and I suppose you disguise it in some way. That I don't even know how I would answer that, and I'm sitting here on the stage trying to answer that now. And what happened, because my father died when I was 12, he had a cancer, and they x-rayed him, and there were only two in my family, my brother and myself, and there was no more offspring. And so it was the treatment that probably meant that we were only a family of two. I'm not sure, but it's an element. And in other books, there are small families. I haven't written a book about a family of 8 or 16.
But it's that great mystery.
Yeah.
What went on? That is one of the great mysteries, you know. And I think nothing is the short answer, but I'm sure there's a long description of nothing that could be.
Yeah,
there
was a family, and they were good friends of mine in Belfast, and they had 14, I think it was, and the milkman used to leave off a crate every morning. They got the whole crate.
Were there jokes about the milkman? our postman had, he was called Mr. Pigeon, and he had over 12 of his own. Known children.
Pigeon Post.
The Pigeon Post. Many of your characters take religion and their departure from religion very seriously.
Yes.
Is that something you can talk to, as the Americans say? Could you talk to that loss, that sense of absence, or the kind of, the empty sky?
Well, yeah, in that I grew up in this family that was completely Catholic and completely religious. I was an altar boy and performed as an altar boy. And thinking back on that growing up and comparing it to the life of a writer in some way, that you're being introduced to all these images and symbols that you learn to read at a different level, that you're told, or at least you find out, that when the vestments are red, scarlet, it's blood, and that the black ones are for mass for the dead, and white ones are hope, and green ones are, and also at Easter the light is passed through the church from one person to another, like knowledge, and the absolutely wonderful dramatic way of conducting themselves. And then you reach an age where you say, this is wonderful, but it's not true. That's the only hitch.
Conspiracy of lies. Yeah.
And conspiracy of lies, yes. Where did I hear that within the last couple of days?
It recurs in the book as a phrase that she's thinking about, everyone believing the same thing.
No, there was 2 nights ago on television.
Don't say the T word.
There was a wonderful writer from Egypt. And she was 85, and she told of her genital mutilation, and she was wonderfully clear about the whole thing, and she described the awfulness of the event. And then, as she sort of came out of what they had done to her, she noticed that her mother was colloguing and talking and laughing with all the people who had done the thing to her. And that the mother, she realized, was in cahoots with these people. Now, in some way, there is that in the religious thing that's handed from parents to children, and is very difficult to get over, to say, is this true or is it not? At no point do you ever question it in parents and things, so that you have to find it out by yourself. And this is what happens to Catherine at some point. She thinks that, how can I, a girl from this small town in the middle of Ulster, kind of go against people of the mental ability of Thomas Aquinas, and books, libraries, all built up on religion, and yet I don't believe it. So that
you've a huge sympathy for the lives and difficulties, the internalized shame and the anatomies even of women. We're looking at a group of women here, for the most part, with honourable exceptions. And I just wonder, do people have a response to the gender leap that Bernard MacLaverty has made in this book, which I think is pretty astonishing? Any questions about all of that, or observations? Yes.
Checking with Mr. Google before I came about Bernard MacLaverty, and it mentioned that people were surprised, amazed that a man wrote about a woman so feelingly. But I didn't feel that when I was reading the book. It just showed such a deep understanding of the human nature.
Yeah.
That I didn't think about whether has a man written this, has a woman written this. It just didn't come into it at all.
Do you get a lot of amazement? And how do you feel about that? Like, how did you do it? Easily.
Yes, yeah. Well, I wanted to, that idea of human, that when a man kind of sees his firstborn and the feelings that come in that event, they're utterly real, utterly unforgettable, so that it's the man and the woman. The woman, they feel the same, but there's a very different physical thing going on. So I felt that I could risk taking that. It came from a short story that I had written just prior to writing Grace Notes, and it was a story called At the Beach. And it's about a couple who go away to Spain for a holiday, and the opening half of the story is about this couple and the man. In a way, in the middle of the story, the baton is handed over to the woman, and she goes into the town when the town is in siesta, and she's by herself, and she has a moment of truth. She drops a stone into a well outside a church. She thinks, she remembers her life, and the story then becomes hers. And as a writer, I thought, hey, I think this is working. And then I wondered, could I do the same kind of thing with a novel, and to make a human being a female would be an interesting kind of exploration. There were many, many things about it that I obviously didn't know, and I am utterly grateful to my wife Madeline, who is here tonight. And the information, and not only it's information of a sort, I suppose. The feelings and the intensities and all of those things she talked about and pointed out. And then there were practical things, like the living upstairs from me was a midwife. And I said, would you mind if I could show you a section of this book? Would you tell me if it's okay, or if I've missed the mark altogether? And she read that section, and she handed it back to me and said, no, that's fine, absolutely, that's very good, fine. But the only thing is that you're not allowed Johnson's baby powder. That it's so fine, the alum is so fine that it gets into the wee baby's lungs, and you shouldn't have it. We ban it on all the wards. And so I blue penciled Johnson's baby powder.
A little bit of it survived. She's always talcing the baby's bottom, which is of its time, because it had gone out now, and a beautiful description of it. Of the kind of plumping noise when you put down the container, and the little cloud of grey dust is so gorgeous. Did anyone, apart from me, have flashbacks during that birth scene? Or have any observations to make about all of that? To me it's amazing because it's free of the... when men write women characters, it's sometimes seen as like a dog walking on its hind legs, that it's not amazing that it should be done well, but that it should be done at all. Yes. But a lot of that kind of blending impulse, the impulse to empathise so deeply with another person's life, incidentally female or very vitally female. For me, when other male writers do it, the whole project has a burden of anxiety and weirdness. I always tell students, you can tell a male writer writing a woman, because they're always putting them in the shower and they're always soaping themselves a lot. You know, that a young male writer will put a female character into the shower. Suddenly there's a lot of soap. And it goes on for a very long time. And you say, no, that is absolutely you just enjoying the idea of a woman in the shower. And that's not actually how women wash at all. Or I couldn't speak for all. But your description is, and you're describing very dramatic, very problematic things like childbirth, but they're not anxious. It's not anxious somehow. Is that fair comment?
Well, yes, yeah. I mean,
do you look at other writers and say, no, I wouldn't do that?
It's like turning out your handbag or something like that. That, you know, what's in there. Or I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in the human nature of what was going on, and that kind of at times it's pointed out that the like nested like Russian dolls that comes from the women that throughout, and it's Granny Boyd is the first remembered one, and all of that, and I felt that was important rather than soaping in the shower.
Yeah, and very distinctive. Also, this idea that she has when the baby comes, that it's like learning the theory of music and never having heard the sound, that suddenly everything makes this amazing sense. It's very beautiful. Turning out your handbag. I do feel you wouldn't mind turning out people's handbags, though. That you'd find a lot to say about.
Yes. Well, it wasn't in this one.
The art of the birth, and you know, when we were talking there about sectarianism, and how families were affected by, you know, things like unmarried mothers and all the rest. You think it's no surprise that this woman who's left her family and has no contact with her family and has in a bad relationship, it's no surprise then that she takes a tilt towards depression in the book. But we were surprised that such a thing could happen. It was supposed to be that all of these factors would be at play, but you'd be grand. You get on with it. Worse things happened. But it's no surprise to me then that she should tumble into depression.
Yeah. I don't know why, but I'm thinking of the imagery of that in the writing of the book, that I knew that there was to be this kind of depression after the birth that would happen. And I remember in Glasgow going along to a science fair and seeing a remarkable experiment I had never seen before of a wee set of steps, and all these children were sat round, and the scientist was performing this for them, and there was a kind of glass thing of carbon dioxide, which he was going to pour down, and there were like dozens of candles on each step, and he poured this thing, and each layer of candles winked out as the gas fell down or slid down the steps, and I could hardly wait to get home to get writing this down as a school memory of Catherine's, that here was a kind of symbolic but very real expression of how her life and the joy of her life was being winked out in a way.
I mean, you get the repetitiveness and the mental patter of depression, but the book doesn't stay in the depression. I mean, the depressed person feels this is it.
Yes.
There is no end to this.
Mm-hmm.
But the book is in charge.
Mm-hmm.
And you move on. She moves on. And that wonderful scene at the beach. I wondered, you know, what readers, and it annoys writers a little, people say, I wanted more about... Do people want more about this or that in the book? So Bernard can defend himself against your you know, did you want more about the... Yeah.
I do. I would have loved more about the
the mum. I know we spoke about her already, but I think it's a wonderful book and really well written, because I noticed as you went through the book, she wasn't extremely judgmental, or the telling of the story wasn't judgmental towards the mum. She went home from the funeral. She was just kind of bearing witness to her mum's way of being. And the same with Dave in the story, kind of wondered what his story was about. I would have loved to just heard a tiny little bit more about him. But definitely, if you were to do it, such as Sebastian Barry on it, and write another angle on it, I would have loved the mum, because I think when you think back of her, and the love she shared with the baby, the mum did something right. She did good pieces as well. I don't think it was just her defining the mother, I'm going to do this right, the mum did it all wrong. It wasn't like that. So I think the mum loved it, and I'd love to carry on.
Do you ever feel like going back to the book?
No. No, I think that if you've sculpted a book and tested it to a kind of destruction, that you want to move on to something else. I do find that I tend to write about the same kind of things and the same kind of images, that it worries me that you say, well, why hadn't I moved on, But I mean, they said about E.M. Foster that he wrote the same novel 6 times, but with different, that his concerns were these, and he examined these, I found myself in a very strange position when Anne invited me to do that radio interview and talk about it tonight. That 20 years ago, maybe 23 years ago, I was writing this, and I thought, oh my God, I better read it, and because I forget. And so I read it, and there were aspects of it that you wanted to edit, you wanted to rewrite, but I would just leave it alone at that point, that it was from a certain time in my life. It was Sean O'Fuillan said that when he was asked to produce his collected stories, that he wanted to change them, but he said, no, I'll not change them, because they're the stories of a young man.
Yeah. But I'm only taunting you now with would you go back and all the rest, because one of the observations I have is that readers want psychology and writers want structure. So we have to make a thing, and you want more of this or that within the thing, but it's actually the shape that makes sense to the writer in a funny way. So you can't have more of the mother.
But the structure of this was very interesting, in that that how can I say this? That the novels that I had written previously were in chime with the things that were happening in the north of Ireland. That the first novel, Lamb, is very depressing and an awful kind of story, and Cal was equally so, depressing material, sad material, and then the situation began to change, and there was peace as a possibility, and therefore I thought, oh, well, maybe we can have peace, that this will be over at some stage, and that was kind of represented in the book, and yet we couldn't push off from the side. So the book is in 2 parts. The first part of the book ends in a kind of sadness, that we know that her depression is not going to go away, but then we move on to the second part of the book, where it ends in a triumph, and you go with the triumph, and you say, this is wonderful. She's composed such a wonderful piece of work, and she's lifted up, and then you say, but I've read in the first part of the book, which happens chronologically later, that there are still struggles to be had there. So there were other interesting things for a writer, maybe that you had the book in two parts, part 1 and part 2, like War and Peace.
I remember reading somewhere someone saying that all writing is done either sinking into or rising out of a depression, which is a depressing thing to hear when you spend your life at the desk. But that is very much what happens to Catherine on the beach when she starts to rise.
Yes.
And the sap rises, and with it, the music comes. I think it's really, for me, even more than the triumph at the end, that is the tiny triumph in the book with the naked baby and the scene on the beach.
Yeah. Sorry, maybe I'm going away, but the sort of research that you do, I'm very lazy, and I don't do much research. So that this book is about somebody who's from the north of Ireland, who has been to Queen's University, Belfast, who has gone to Glasgow, who has taught on the island of Islay, and there was one bit I couldn't fit in. There was amazing thing that happened to me, was that to try and make a wee bit of money, I was asked by an airline company to go on a journey to Kiev and write a diary of the time in Kiev. And I jumped at that. Not only are you exploring a wonderful and strange place, but you're getting paid for it. And that was the thing. I couldn't think, what can I use this for in research? And then I thought Catherine McKenna wins a scholarship to go to Kiev. And there's a composer in Kiev that she's very interested in the work. And because there's a whole religious thing as well, that she thinks that coming out of a communist state, there's going to be an atheistic music, and yet the whole thing flips on its head, and that this old man is writing hymns to the Virgin Mary, and his religious thing is part of his music. So research and avoiding it actually can lead you into interesting ways of writing.
But each book for me gives you a new way of seeing the world, or in this case of hearing the world. That what I'm taking away from Grace Notes is these tiny sounds, like the sound of the mother husking about in the tea caddy, that the soundscape of the book, and also this eye for the microscopic and the tiny, which you're so I haven't read that from anyone else. To me, that's like. So I just wonder, are there things that other people are taking away from the book that they enjoyed particularly?
I know we hit on it, but I just want to applaud you for your insight into postpartum depression. I thought it was absolutely excellent. But I wanted to ask about your obviously great knowledge and passion for music. I believe that you've written some texts for opera.
Yes.
I actually listened to one today about the elephant.
Oh, right.
Very enjoyable. So I just want to ask where your passion or where your knowledge for music comes from, and is that something that you may diverse off into when you're, moving forward? Is it something that you may move on to do more?
I suppose my history of music or listening to music was as far back as when I was doing A-levels at school and pretend to be studying and the radio would be on, and there was a program called Music at Night, and the radio in the house would be left on by default or something, and then you would hear bits of music coming out and you say, because the alternative is study, and you say, oh, I'll listen to this. And you started listening to it, and Chopin and things like that came out. And we had friends. I had a friend, dear friend, who died last year, Joe McWilliams, and he was very keen on opera. And I remember coming out of school, walking home with him, and him talking about opera and taking me into the house and playing on his dancette, John McCormick and Caruso. And so there was, in the group of friends that we had, there was a great thing about music. And that started then going to concerts and going to the Messiah in the Ulster Hall in Belfast. And just gradually over my life, I've listened to music and spread in depth and chamber music, horrible music, great music. And I thought, well, I don't want to write about a writer. It would be interesting to write about a composer, and then you start to construct those sound pictures. I think too about the woman, the mother husking through the tea caddy. It stemmed from a mistake that the tea was actually finished, and there was a big spoon at the bottom of it, and somebody poured all the tea into it so that you couldn't get the spoon.
Would this spoon have two little Dutch people at the top of it?
Yes, it does.
Just as a matter of interest.
Yeah, and it's a big flat spoon.
I mean, there's a sense going through it that you're retrieving objects from your own childhood. That, oh, I'd forgotten about that.
But the music then kind of took over and became something that was very important in the book. And the reading, the only research I did in it was into music and listening to wonderful pieces of music, and all in two parts that would fit the structure, a lot of them, and as I kind of grasped this idea of composer, just at that time in Glasgow, I saw that there was a workshop for composers, and I went along to that, and there was a Chinese composer came, a guy called, I'll not remember his name now, but he was wonderful, and I thought we're going to hear music from these people, and he invited 10 students onto the stage, and he just made them breathe. Different breaths, different intensities of breath, and how you think of a thing in your breath, and then you perform that thing in your breath, and then you perform it again, and then you find a sign for it, or, so that it was a totally different world to me. In the same ways that the giving birth is a completely different world for me, then to find that and to be able to harness it and to put it into a novel in some kind of convincing fashion. I mean, I think that if you find those details of husking around tea caddies, if you find the right words for those things, then maybe the reader will think, oh, I can trust this person about things that are above that.
But it's also very moving, this idea of a guy in a small town, which Belfast was in those days, having, at the flick of a transistor radio switch, a kind of available greatness, the sweetness of classical music. It was just there. And that there's no big class issue, there's no barrier, there's no like, oh, that's too hard for me. It was just existed, and I think we trust that as well. Mm-hmm. We don't go, oh, composer, that's a really odd. I don't understand that now.
Yes. It's
just that we just take it one step at a time. Are there other things that people took away from reading the book that they that they can
Could I
goes
just
on to.
sort of add something to that, though? But you asked about the libretti idea. I mean, the guy who wrote the music for the elephant thing was from Armagh, and Gareth Williams, and Scottish Opera was trying to put new operas, a thing called 5:15, so that there would be 5 15-minute operas over an evening for an entertainment, and they asked Gareth and I to work together, and we composed or made up a 15-minute opera. But that was then at a later date. The elephant one was about an hour long, and we did it in schools. Yes, and the answer to your question is I would love to do some more, and because maybe the hard work is done by Gareth, that he makes the music, whereas all you have to do is have a story and tell it believably. Sorry, the next question.
No, I was taken aback with somebody we didn't mention, but you were asking was there a character you'd like to know more about as well. The music teacher I thought was very interesting, and her connection to her, because obviously the depression, which I know for myself and a lot of other artists, obviously in regular life, your depression doesn't really make sense, but somehow if you can put it into theatre or put it into art or put it into writing, it's not madness anymore. You can actually use it and it can come into something beautiful, which it does at the end. But she has a beautiful connection with the music teacher, and I would love to know more about her. I thought she was very interesting. And of course, art meets art, and we can talk, and sometimes we can't really get along in the regular life as well. In the regular day-to-day, ordinary things are difficult.
Yes.
But when art meets art, it's a whole different thing.
I suppose I translate things, from writing to music, and maybe if I told you about growing up and starting to write, I suppose in the last years of school, in your A-level year, that to start to write. Now, it turned out that there were about 3 doors away from me, there was an English teacher, a wonderful woman, and she said to me, somehow or other she heard that I was trying to write, and she said, if you want to show me anything, I would be delighted to read it. Over the years, I showed her stuff, and she was very good. She suggested changes, or she just generally helped, and I thought that was wonderful. And that idea of teacher and pupil was one that I've used again and again in stories. And a story called My Dear Palestrina, of a teacher and a boy. That's a music one. This... Is
it always benign? I mean, is it always a good and wonderful relationship?
Mostly. In My Dear Palestrina, the teacher goes on about how good music is in a way, and that nobody could be bad and write music, but I think she's completely...
Oh, that's completely wrong, isn't it? That's very inaccurate.
Yeah.
Altogether. How about libraries, Bernard? How did they figure in your formation as a writer? Seeing as we're in one now.
Yeah, I love libraries, and I remember going to them because there were girls in them. Earlier this evening, I remembered a quote from Einstein, which talked about the knowledge, and he said, the only knowledge you need is the way to the nearest library. And I thought that was great. But yeah, to there were girls from St Dominic's and Fort William, and they would come down to the library in Belfast, which at that time had still got bullet holes in it all over the front from the war, being strafed from the air, and relationships were teased out, and but there was some reading done. It was where and it's also when you were bored or at your schoolwork, you went up and you got a book, a huge big book on the, paintings of Pizarro or photographs of that you wouldn't have seen normally. So the library was very important, and it's also very sexy that you found on the shelves books that fed you information which wouldn't be in your house. Even though you looked under the cushions.
You said the girls are in the library. I thought, no, the girls are in the books in the library. Bernard has also written 2 screenplays for Cal and Lamb. His next book, Midwinter Break, is coming out in August, and I urge you all to follow on from Grace Notes by picking it up. There's already interest in it from the film industry. Maybe people have questions about the writer's life in that way, what it is to work between genres, how you get by, all of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, could I just briefly touch back on the theme of redemption?
Yes.
Just briefly, 23 years ago when you were writing the book, you obviously believed that in the redeeming power of art, and that's where you find the redemption, and that in Catherine's case it's music, and you mentioned the visual arts. And I feel that you're saying that we're replacing religion now, that the redemption is not to be found, especially in the Western world, in the established religions. Do you still feel that to this day?
Or that we need to be redeemed, if I could add.
Yeah.
Is redemption necessary still?
Well, good point. Yeah. Or is it just art and beautiful things in life that's where we find it or make it?
I think I don't know whether I'm answering your question or not, but I do feel that having put religion to one side, that it very neatly means that arts come in, that the way we see things, the way we look at our fellow human beings is a kind of religious substitute in a way. That arts, although as you said, there are bad people in them, but the whole thing of painting, of writing songs, of writing operas, of writing books, all of those things seem to have a link to me in a kind of redemption or joy or whatever, a way of living your life, and it's a substitute for what used to be religion in my life.
I'm more into refuge than redemption.
Okay.
Anyone else? Want to break into the movies?
Suddenly went quiet.
It did. After all of that. I think in the quietness, it might be time to thank Bernard MacLaverty very much, and to thank you all for your engaged, active listening and chatting and all the rest of it, and to thank him particularly for this wonderful novel. Thank you for reading it and for coming out tonight, and all the best. Thanks, Bernard.
Thank you.